Welcome to Demo Day, where young innovators take the stage and showcase real-world projects to a global audience. At WEquil School, students learn to become innovators, teaching each other each week through their creations. WEquil app has thousands of novel and useful projects born out of our students' strengths, interests, and passions. But Demo Day is more than just a presentation. It's a celebration of innovation, collaboration, and the power of young minds. Join us on this incredible journey of inspiration as we witness the next generation of problem solvers and leaders. From Harvard professors to industry experts, our Demo Days attract incredible guest speakers who share their knowledge and ignite curiosity. Whether you're a young innovator looking to showcase your creations or a family seeking an extraordinary learning experience, Demo Day is here for you. Together, let's create a world where young minds flourish, ideas come to life, and innovation knows no boundaries. Join us for an unforgettable journey of learning, growth, and discovery. Welcome to Demo Day.
So I've been listening to this podcast called The Science of Everything, just because, we've talked so much about a lot of topics on, philosophy, education, psychology, all these things, that frankly, listening to podcasts on those things were getting a little bit boring. So I was thinking more about, material sciences and some of these things that I'm not as familiar with. And one of the podcasts that I stumbled across was on the systems of government. So this is something that I was learning about, and I got a bit carried away. So this is 36 pages long, but I'll try to be brief with my presentation. And so governments are an incredibly important part of understanding our world and the complex behaviors and structures within it. And so as our world continues to evolve, understanding the structures, individuals, and institutions that regulate countries is critical in understanding how we can continue pushing the boundaries of innovation to help people around the world. So what is a government? A government is the organization or system through which a body of people or associated organizations control a state or country. It includes individuals and institutional structures. There is a distinction between a government and the government, where a government is a specific administration, so a government in a point of time with a particular individuals in charge, versus the government, which is just the government over time, the institution over time. And I'll be talking primarily about the governments using certain historical examples as reference. And so the lines between different kinds of governments can sometimes be fuzzy, and there's a lot of overlaps between them. But in this project, I'll be describing the common features of these different systems of government based on the type and extent of political power. And so the systems of government I will cover include anarchy, democracy, oligarchy, monarchy, and autocracy. The names originate from Greek roots such as archy and "-cy", meaning rule or power. And so I'll be covering these in going from least to most central power. Central power in the context of government and political science refers to the concentration of political authority and decision-making capability at a single point or body within the state. And then I'll also be using a stability metric based on historical prevalence and longevity on a scale from 1 to 10, 1 being low and 10 being high. And then I also cover a bunch of other metrics at the end of this project. So I'll just jump right into it. So essentially, anarchy stems from the Greek roots a, without, and narchy, ruler, which means a lack of government and central control. But there are several different types of anarchy, one being ochlocracy. The stability of this is pretty unstable, as you can see. The term is derived from the Greek words aklos, meaning mob, and kratos, meaning power or rule. Ochlocracy means rule by a mob or intimidation from a mob to those in power. And so this fits under the broad definition of anarchy, which is, a state of society without a recognized governing authority. And so this kind of fits into that definition. There are some historical examples. One of the most well-known is the Salem witch trials, which occurred in 1692. There were a lot of ochlocratic characteristics such as mass hysteria and mob mentality driven by fear and superstition, absence of a fair legal process due to an oversized influence of public opinion, and violence and persecution. And so This is probably one of the most chaotic governing systems, if it can even really be considered a system. So the next is isocracy. So this has the lowest stability scale or score, because this is purely theoretical, as there's no historical examples. Essentially, it is derived from the Greek roots iso, meaning equal, and kratos, meaning power or rule, which refers to a political system in which all individuals have equal power and authority in the governance and decision-making process. And so it shares some of the same ideals as democracy, but takes it further, insisting on equal governance rights for every individual. However, as I already mentioned, this is purely theoretical, as there are no historical examples. Next is libertarian socialism. This advocates for the abolition of centralized state dominion in favor of a decentralized society, often described as stateless, without private property. And so this is kind of using some of these anarchist, concepts of there's no, state authority, imposing any regulations. But then there's also a lot more emphasis on like equality and distribution of resources. And so there are some historical examples that I mentioned in here. A lot of these I'll kind of skip over for the purposes of not making this a super long presentation, but I think they're very interesting if you do want to look into them. Next is anarcho-capitalism, which is very interesting because it has, it has the anarchy concepts of, there's nobody really in charge, but instead of equitable distribution of resources, it's kind of about, all of these things provided by the government, including law enforcement, courts, and defense, could be provided by the private sector through contracts and private businesses. There are a couple historical examples, including medieval Iceland and the American Old West, or the Wild West. So that is pretty interesting. So the next form of system of government is democracy. There are two types of democracy, direct democracies and representative democracies, also called republics. And so the key principle is that all eligible citizens have an equal say in the decisions that affect their lives. So a direct democracy means that citizens directly participate in decision-making without intermediaries or representatives, but this becomes a lot less manageable the larger the population, because it's just harder to get everyone's input when you have a larger population. While that is true, I think there's potential for technology to allow for direct democracies to operate regardless of population, so there's some interesting opportunities to talk about when it comes to that. So there are a couple of historical examples, as well as continuing direct democracies. Switzerland is an example of a direct democracy that still exists to this day, and ancient Athens is a historical example of direct democracy. And then next is a republic, which is instead of everyone directly voting on policies and decision making, they vote for representatives who will then make those decisions. And so there are also mechanisms such as a constitution to limit the power of these elected officials and protect minority rights. And so there are also many subtypes of republics. Most notably are the parliamentary and presidential models of a representative democracy. And so democracies were relatively rare until the 19th century, with influence of the Enlightenment introducing democratic values. So next is oligarchy. Essentially, this means that there is a minority of people that holds all the power and authority. And so this can be based off of several factors like wealth, nobility, or corporate interests. And so there are a few characteristics here that I list about what constitutes an oligarchy. So there are many different types of oligarchies, including aristocracies and plutocracies. And so an aristocracy is a form of government in which the power is held by a nobility, a privileged class that typically inherits its status. And so essentially, this can also kind of play into the plutocracy, which is a system or society ruled by the wealthiest individuals. However, oftentimes this nobility class or aristocrats are the most wealthy. And so you can kind of see a lot of overlap in these two, which is why I kind of put them in the same section. And so here are some historical examples that I provide here. Next is a technocracy, which I think is pretty interesting. Essentially, it's a system of governance where decision makers are selected based on their technical expertise and knowledge in a particular area. And so this generally doesn't have too many historical examples and is usually short-lived based off of, some sort of crisis like a war, which I provide some examples of here. Next is a critarchy. I think I'm pronouncing that right, which refers to a form of government where the judicial system holds significant power. So generally, this is a judicial system enforcing and working within pre-existing customary laws instead of passing new laws, or else it would kind of just mean people doing whatever they want because they can just create those laws and do whatever they want. So there are a couple historical examples that I provide here, but generally this form of government is very rare. Next is a diarchy, which is a form of government characterized by the rule of two leaders. One of the popular examples of this is a Roman Republic, where they had two consuls elected annually to rule together. And so next is a single party state. Essentially, this is a form of government where a single political party has a right to form the government and no other parties are allowed to run for major political power. Sometimes there are no elections, sometimes there are elections, and there's literally only one person on the ballot. So that's kind of weird, but small opposition parties are sometimes permitted to exist, but they don't really have any influence or power. And next is a dominant party state. This is based kind of in practice is a single party state, but pretends not to be, and is kind of we're having elections, but one party consistently dominates over the political landscape. And so essentially these are nominally democratic countries, but don't actually, really have a lot of diversity, and it's just ruled by a single party. And so next is monarchy. So monarchy is a form of government where a single person, the monarch, serves as the head of state for life or until abdication. And so there are two different types of monarchies, and then there's a third type that I kind of included here that's a little bit different, which I'll talk about. So first is absolute monarchy, and in absolute monarchy, the monarch has almost complete power over the government and its people. And so their decisions are not subject to legal or legislative challenges. However, a constitutional monarchy is one in which the monarch's powers are limited by a constitution or legislative body. And so this used to be more common, but is now usually replaced by a republic. In the past, constitutional monarchs had more power, but increasingly they don't really have much power and are kind of like a figurehead where they're like, look at me, I'm the monarch, but they're not really doing much. And so lastly is enlightened absolutism, which essentially is basically where a monarch is in quote unquote enlightened, which means that they've embraced the principles of the Enlightenment, such as rationality, fair treatment of subjects, religious freedom, and the rights to private property, putting them in kind of a different category. Essentially, there are a few examples of this, but it kind of is a bit of a different category than what you might see generally when it comes to just, absolute monarchs without that aspect to it. So the last general category of systems of government is autocracy, which is a form of government in which supreme power is concentrated in the hands of one person, whose decisions are subject to neither external legal restraints nor regularized mechanisms of popular control. And so this is a bit different than a monarchy, which I talk about here as to why. But there are several different types. The first is theocracy. Essentially, this can have two different definitions based off of, who you are in relation to that government. If you're in the theocracy in support of it, you would say that it is basically they are ruled by their god. You would say that, it's basically informed by, whatever it claims to be divinely guided. For those on the outside, you would might define it as a state governed by a monarch who claims to be enlightened by a god or claims to be a god. And so there are many theocracies throughout history that I mentioned here. Next is military rule. This is often more of a transitional form of government, which refers to government led by military dictatorship or military junta. A junta is basically kind of like a group of military leaders instead of just one. And so this can play out in multiple different ways, commonly seen as either the military directly appointing itself to run the country following a coup, or when the military has an outsized influence. And so there are a bunch of historical examples that I mentioned. Next is a dictatorship. A dictatorship is basically a monarchy, but they don't claim to be a dictator. Like generally dictators don't like to say that they're dictators. And so the dictatorship can be stable depending on how competent the dictator is, but ultimately depends on how long the dictator lives or maintains power. And lastly is the totalitarian state. And so this is more of a recent phenomenon. Essentially, it's a government that seeks to control all aspects of public and private life of its citizens. And so this is the reason why this is more of a recent phenomenon is because without technology, it's really hard to do this, to basically completely control not only what people do, but how they think and the whole culture, and what people say, the art that they can create. Like all of those things are basically, you're trying to control that in a totalitarian state. And so there are a lot of different strategies that totalitarian states use to control its population, including propaganda and personality cult around its leader. A popular depiction of this is the book 1984, giving us a fictional glimpse into the reality of one living under a totalitarian state. These don't necessarily have to be dictatorships, but could also be a single party state, such as the Soviet Union after Lenin and Stalin. So today, there are no real lasting totalitarian states except for North Korea, but there are historical examples such as Nazi Germany and the Soviet Union, and the communist China under Mao. Lastly, I provide some metrics of government. Essentially, there are certain, ways that you can represent government in, its effectiveness in certain areas, such as efficiency, accountability, transparency, equity, freedom, rule of law. And I have a bunch here, but essentially I write all of these governments using ChatGPT, which, is drawing from all these historical examples for all of these different forms of government. I also have a glossary with some of these terms, but yep, sorry for the very long presentation.
Woo! Round of applause.
It was totally worth it.
Wow.
Thank you.
Man. So one thing that we might start doing as we grow, because we got this new membership program, and it's pretty cute. App's doing great. So like we're gonna have more demo days, we're gonna have more students, we're gonna have more clubs, we're gonna need to have outlets for projects that are more in depth, that can really help people to sign up. Now we have the new calendar function too. So it's like to go into demo day and be able to say, oh, there's all this stuff going on probably all day. Like 6 months from now, it's just gonna be like the whole day. So you'll be able to just sign up for, hey, I really want to check this project out, get notifications from people you're following, to see like what you want to see. So that's one thing. And if anybody doesn't have a comment here, I do have a challenge question for you. For you kids, what do you think? What's the government of WEquil app?
Dictator. Sumay's the dictator.
I would say an enlightened monarch.
Hang on. I need to look at the project again.
Yeah, but the dictator always says they're not a dictator, Sumay.
I need to look at the project again. Give me a sec.
Okay, so we've got one for enlightened monarch from the enlightened monarch. We've got one vote for dictator.
Okay.
The good thing is that we
What else?
have an
Any other
amazing
votes?
dictator.
Looks like Elijah's got an opinion. Go for it, Elijah. What do you think?
I think he's muted.
Dad?
I think it's an isocracy. Acracy?
Isocracy? You mean one of the forms of anarchy?
Yeah. But we all have
That's fair.
equal rule.
Okay, so
On the
No.
app, but the school might be enlightened monarch, and the app might be
Right.
Hang on.
Okay, so here's one of the things that I think is missing from your project. It's not long enough, Sumay. Something that you missed. So, there's the true power. Where the true power is in a government is not necessarily always clear in terms of the activities and the actions of what's happening within the country or the state. So you can have an enlightened monarch or some kind of a dictator that decides, as dictator, we're going to allow people lots of freedom. Mongolia was like that. When
That's kind of
Genghis
the
Khan
concept
took
of
over
the
all of
enlightened
Asia,
monarch, yeah.
that Mongolia, for a long time, like the saying was that you could have a bag of gold and march all the way from Eastern Europe to the coast of China and not get robbed. And you could also believe in whatever religion you wanted. Like the Mongols didn't care, right? But that was because Genghis Khan said so. So the true power still was right there with Genghis Khan, right? So you need to differentiate. So on the one hand, that's why you can have one student. It's like, it's an anarchy. We quit school. And then you can have somebody else being like, dictator Sumay. They're both right.
Yeah.
In a sense.
Right.
So yeah, Sumay, sorry, you get a B plus. B.
Okay.
Plus. Good. A for effort.
Yeah.
Anybody else have a comment?
Mom and me were both right. It's a technocracy in an category of oligarchies.
We also want it to grow into something that is more of a democracy.
Yeah.
Where kids actually get to vote, unlike in America.
Maybe it could be like a parliamentarian monarchy where Sumay still gets, where we form, a group of people that make decisions, but in Sumay's name.
Yeah, that was one where.
And then she's still the face of WEquil and still makes it,
What is that? I think that Iran is one of these countries that has like a spiritual leader that's still technically in charge, but then they'll have a government and a president, right? That's doing their thing.
It's the constitutional monarchy where generally it's like if you see the UK, like it's not, the monarch does not really have any power. They're just like,
but in Iran, it's the opposite.
Yeah, in Iran, no.
The guy has like a veto power, or he can chop off their heads if they disagree with them. So I shouldn't have said that. It's
okay. We quit school.
I think about the ruling in the New Jersey court that said that Elon Musk had too many friends and family members on his board, so it wasn't a fair oversight. That's kind of like a government where you stack the government with your friends and family, and then it's not, then basically you took over, right?
Sounds like the nonprofit we were talking about. Yeah, no, that's fair. I think that's well, this is another one of those things.
And the other thing is that where did we learn all about governments, Joe? Civilization.
Civilization's great. Oh, we should definitely be playing some Civilization. The concept of government Chloe's going to be doing her project here shortly, and her setting up the structure of her company is another example of government that kids in terms of their family structure and their setup and advocating for ways that they can try to resolve disputes and have some way of going about expressing grievances. These are all real world learn by doing opportunities to learn about government that we were doing in the house ever since, Sumay was maybe 4 or 5 years old, right? So like some of that intuition about government, I think it can help if parents talk to their kids in a way that makes it very relevant to them. And if that's not happening in the household, it's only because the parents haven't really realized that it's everywhere. Go ahead, Elizabeth. Sorry.
Yeah, well, I think you kind of touched on this with your, ranking of stability, but I think it's interesting to look into like kind of what forms of government actually work very well. And, Chloe, that's kind of like looking at communism. All these countries that say they're communists are not actually truly communists, because if they were, communism looks very pretty. The problem with it is that it never works because of human nature. So I think that's kind of an interesting to look at too, what forms of government actually work well, given the state of human nature.
Yeah, the reason communist doesn't work is that everyone's supposed to work hard to supply the entire people, but instead people just laze around like thinking, oh, I do nothing and everyone else can take care of like supplying the community with food. Except if everyone thinks that way, they're all going to starve.
Right, but if it actually worked, it wouldn't be so bad. The problem is it just doesn't work.
This is another one of those things that I love about WEquil School, is that we can have adults and kids talking about topics that when you go outside the house and you try to talk to your neighbors, all of a sudden everybody just loses their ability to think coherently and speak rationally and use logic and facts and data and not just let their own political ideologies take over the discussion. And then you can't learn anything or have a conversation. Like this is so cool. Like I'm sure we all have some differences of opinion about government and policy, but that doesn't mean that our kids can't create really interesting, compelling projects and share ideas with each other, and we can all learn from each other. I would love to do a government focused demo day at some point with projects from our students so that we can set an example for all of these adults trying to pick a president, and how to actually have public discourse. Wouldn't that be great? Because apparently the adults haven't figured it out. So maybe we should give the kids a shot at it.
Well, I think Chloe, you also have your project that you want to present. So
yeah.
Do you want to share your screen?
Oh, I am so excited about this.